Hello, everyone.
Actually,
Welcome to
bonjour. Bonjour.
Bonjour. Yeah, we
Bon
should definitely spell that
après-midi
right.
et bonne nuit, depending on where you are.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Bastille Day here in Master the World. Lovely to see you here. As usual, as you're coming in, give us a shout out. Let us know where you're coming from. And while we're waiting, Evan, do you want to explain this picture?
No, this is people who are familiar with Master of the World and feline intrusion are familiar with my adorable cat, Chivito, who is not, by the way, who's Spanish named. He's not French named, but he decided that he was into it as well too. So we got him to get his beret on, and he's doing a still life, kind of in a non-cubist style today, but he does have his head appropriately in that askance position that French people can sometimes do when they're going, je comprends pas, whatever. So that's his gig.
That is his French pose. I should say, Evan, this was for a recent birthday that Evan enjoyed from Becky. Becky, Evan, what happened to that shirt that Becky sent over with the hat?
You try and put the shirt on the cat. You try and do that.
Yeah, he wasn't really going for
Qu'est-ce
this
que
It
tu
hat.
was hard.
fais?
It was hard enough to get the beret to stay on his head for long enough for Barbara to take the picture. So we're happy with what we got, and we managed to get the flowers in the background to give people that sort of summertime Provençal rosiness sort of thing that you would want to see.
Love it. Shout out to Becky from our production team, our production Som out in
And by
Healdsburg.
the way, for those of you in the chat who are looking for something to do, thumbs up, thumbs down, more cats or less cats, themed for future MTW seminars.
We need dogs.
We need
I
animals in general. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Lisa. So I just wanted to say, obviously, having it be Bastille Day, I'm just going to spoil it right off the bat. This is all about France today. All the wines we're tasting are from France. So there's not going to be discussion on like, where do you think it's coming from in the world? But there will be discussions on where do you think it's coming from in France. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Master the World, our Bastille
Au
Day
revoir,
edition.
petit Chilivi. I just said goodbye to the cat.
Thank you very much, Evan. I don't know if Jennifer is on today. She's our French teacher in the mix from our Master of the World community. This is our 15th webinar. It's crazy. It's hard to believe. The world is, looking at webinars and going, should we still have them? That is a question that we have for you. So as we approach this webinar, if you enjoy our webinars, want us to keep going on, let us know, because we definitely see fewer people signing on, still kits getting sold, but people are enjoying their kits on their own, watching recordings and what have you. So I'd love to see for you guys, especially those of you who are our core group here, what do you think of having webinars? And if you are so inclined, as always, you can join the leaderboard and Q&A. We're a tight group, 15 sessions in. Please keep asking questions. We're not afraid of hearing the same questions. If you've got them, still don't understand what the particular descriptor is, we're happy to answer it. And of course, thank you for your virtual hugs and hellos. We love them. We love to know where you guys are dialing in from. And today we will have a play along, because this is definitely important to play along. CW72 for those of you who need the code for leaderboard. And of course, tasting notes are online. And very soon we'll have a few new features to share as well. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce everybody else who's here, and then we'll go to wine number 1. Evan, if you will, say hello from San Francisco.
Bonjour, et je vais faire mon présentation complètement en français aujourd'hui parce qu'on est en France. Ha ha ha, just a joke. No, just bonjour from San Francisco. I will not, as I just previously said, do my entire presentation in French, although we could maybe in a future day. But it's great to be here today. I hope you are all well, wherever you are, and look forward as always to tasting with you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Evan. And yeah, the French is definitely a fluent language for you, not so much for the rest of us. Madeline, where are you calling from today?
Je suis en Detroit. I'm in Detroit, Metro Detroit. I understand French if you speak slowly and in present tense, Evan. So I'm just letting you know.
High school, right? Yeah, me
Oh my
Just
God.
remember, où est la toilette?
Ou à la toilette.
Salle de bain.
Je ne parle pas français. There we go.
All right. So
But
we
it's
also have, of course, Tim Gaiser. Tim, where are you calling from today?
Je ne parle pas français and Rio Rancho, New Mexico. And that's the only thing I can say in French. That's it. We're done.
Wonderful. Okay, we have a lot to cover. This is such an exciting kit. It's our first regional themed kit. A while back, for those of you who can think back to kit 111, we did an all Pinot kit, and this is our first all French kit. Many more themes to come, but to kick us off, Madeline, wine number 1.
Cheers, everyone. À votre santé. Virtual, hybrid, or in person. It's always good to have your company. All righty, wine number 1. And, per usual, I'm not going to micromanage this grid, but I'm going to speak to how the wine is reflected in my perception at this moment. Visually, actually, and I can't overstate how important the visual is, particularly when it comes to deduction, and not just for red wine, but white wine as well. In my glass, in direct sunlight, it's showing a little bit more true yellow, and it still has a little bit of olive green glints in it. And just to remind us, green is a little flag for youth. It could be extreme, it could be, relative. Also, I'm noticing as I move it in the glass with one gentle whirl, I don't work it to death because the wine's not going to give you more if you're overly enthusiastic. It moves with a little bit of a weight in the glass. So again, it's telegraphing perhaps moderate plus alcohol. Again, we're not getting attached to anything visually. We're not getting attached to anything. We're perceiving and defining as we go along. When it comes to the descriptions, I'm going to address both the nose and the palate. But I will speak to the nose immediately in the description, because the first thing that strikes me is actually go down to the stone fruit, apricot, nectarine, peach, fresh, ripe, rich. I mean, it's just beautiful, and it's right up front. And then the second wave, especially if you take it on the palate, whoa, you get past the acidity, and then that's where the green apple, green pear, key lime, and white grapefruit kick in, so tart, fresh. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect, but it's not an error in the wine. It's simply its character between how the nose presents itself and then the expression on the palate. Everything is fresh and ripe. Go down to floral, and certainly fresh. It's about fruit blossoms, but also, jasmine, honeysuckle, even lilies. This wine is gently and very prettily perfumed, but not in a dominant way, the way some grape varieties where the floral leads. We can go on to the next page. There is a creature flying in my room, so we may have some more animal interference at the moment. It seems to be some sort of large butterfly.
Does it speak French?
He hasn't spoken yet.
Papillon.
Papillon,
Yeah,
oui.
papillon.
Bonjour, papillon. Bienvenue. There we go. On the palate, I keep wanting to talk about structure, but I'm going to save that. Oops, did we lose our grid? I can't see it. But I'll keep talking to what I can read on my paper. I don't see the slides, FYI. But, again, there's a little bit of herbal element, but it's citrus tone, lemongrass, verbena, a little bit non-citrus spice in the form of honey and ginger, but it's definitely background material. Inorganic earth, big time. And it presents itself on the nose, but in this particular wine, even more dominantly on the palate. TDN, petrol, again, in this wine, to me, it's there, but it's a back note. It's certainly not intrusive, dominant, or annoying. It's an element. Zippo oak aging for sure, or if there is, it's in the most neutral possible oak. There is absolutely an oxidative, nutty character to this wine that's intriguing. So, note to self, it may have spent time in large neutral oak. It's certainly not picking up any flavor components. Going to the very important structure on this wine. Absolutely bone dry. Acidity, at this tasting, it's high for me, or medium plus plus plus. You know, sometimes when you say high, it's like very right. This is important. Alcohol is medium to medium plus. It doesn't pull your attention, but you can perceive it. Remember what we saw visually, the way the wine moved in the glass? That expressed itself in the mouthfeel as you hold it on your palate, in spite of the mouth-watering acidity. Texture, lean and tart, subtext, rich. Phenols, none. And I'm going to bring that up again because we have mouthfeel in terms of weight and acidity, but we don't have, white wine tannin per se. We don't have any of that sense. Finish is very long. And actually, it's still going for me. Complexity, interesting. Medium plus, but with tremendous potential. Tasting this wine, it's telling me, hi, wait 2 to 5 years and you'll get even more layers. The mouthfeel is a big part of the tell on this wine. And what I mean by the tell, the wine is always telling us what it is, right? It just depends on how correctly and closely we listen to it. I think we can go ahead to asking ourselves which grape variety. Aha, Riesling, Pinot Gris, Sauvignon Blanc blend. And please participate in the poll. It's one of our very favorite things because hearing you tell the truth about what you're perceiving is our idea of a good time. It's actually very telling to us. I kid you not. Especially if you think, I don't think it's any one of these three. Tell us what other one you think it is. Say other and then speak up in the chat room.
If you're feeling, sorry, Madeline, I just wanted to jump in and say, if you're feeling that the poll doesn't match the kit hints, that's because for those who are playing this in general land, not in the webinar, who are trying to figure out whether it's France or not, we've put in other countries in there for people who are doing it truly, truly blind. But here we get the luxury, and you get the luxury of having these teachers and educators here to help you decipher between regions. So this is a real chance for you to guess which of these regions they are and really try to understand the difference between some of these varieties, the differences in Alsace versus Loire versus Roussillon, Languedoc.
And the rest of the world doesn't disappear from your conscious and your subconscious. So in discussing Riesling, Pinot Gris, and Sauvignon Blanc, it doesn't mean that you have to pretend that New Zealand and Germany don't exist. It's just an issue that, yes, these are French wines. And by the way, under what region? I asked the ignorant question earlier, what are the Eastern Mountains? And was told gently by my colleagues, Eastern Mountains in France, So we're talking about Jura, Savoie, and such. So look at the grape varieties as you continue to participate in the poll. You've got 2 highly aromatic varieties, Riesling and Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc is highly aromatic, whether it's in a blend or solo. You've got Pinot Gris that is frankly a delightful but non-aromatic variety. So I like to take it down to simplicity, especially if you're struggling. Is the aroma on this, do you have to meet it halfway, or does it jump out of the glass and walk across the room? So you ask yourself that. And then ask yourself, on the 2 aromatic varieties, Riesling and Sauvignon Blanc, what are its most classic thumbprints? Sauvignon Blanc, for instance, take it down to, green elements, AKA grass, herbs, grapefruit and all its little incarnations, right? Riesling, a strong florality. Certainly mouthfeel, acidity figures big time into both Riesling and Sauvignon Blanc. Pinot Gris can have certainly sufficient acidity, but perhaps not as compelling. And also looking at the regions, consider what grape varieties are grown in these regions, particularly when you're talking Loire, Languedoc, Roussillon. Yes, everything can be planted everywhere, but use your common sense too in terms of weighing in about where this wine can come from.
All right, I think it's time. We've given first poll a little more time for you guys to get your sea legs on. Somebody just voted. All right, that's good. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results, and let's see where people are at. So we've got 58% think that it's from it's a Riesling, and 68% Alsace. So what is the characteristic of Alsace versus Loire?
Well, Alsace Riesling, if I'm going to struggle about Riesling, I'm going to consider Riesling from Alsace versus or alongside Riesling from another country, AKA Austria or Germany, if we're talking utterly classic. So, if we're talking Alsace Riesling, what are we talking about? We're talking about weight. We're talking about really a different aromatic presence, perhaps not as high toned and thrilling as, the Mosel, for instance. If we're discussing Pinot Gris from Alsace, we talk about a different mouthfeel. Consider the acidity level, also possibly the perception of actual residual sugar, not an illusion of sweetness.
So in other words, Madeline, are you kind of using the region first in this approach? If you're thinking Alsace, then you're kind of in the Riesling Pinot Gris land. But if you're a Loire, you're not really in the Riesling land because it would have to be another grape variety. Is that how you?
Kinda, that's what I'm saying by use your common sense. We've made it, nothing is easy. This is blind. One will look at the labels worth $1,000, right? Or at least $150. So, if we're using our common sense about what grape varieties are grown where they're classic, where they're dominant, yeah. Because actually, to your point, often when we're doing this, when it's the universe is our growing region on the pole, I will drag my feet looking at the region because I'll be paying closer attention to the varietal expression.
Great. All right. I think, Andrea, we're ready to move to the actual results.
Put your seatbelt on. Here we go.
So we're definitely going to France.
Yes, we're in Alsace. The Vosges are off to the west. And you saw a beautiful snippet of them. And we are in a relatively small town called Egisheim, which I'm undoubtedly slaughtering pronunciation-wise. I don't do German. I do French, Greek, and a little Italian. It is a stone's throw from Colmar, which is known to everyone. And it is really in the heart of the Haut-Rhin, which is always confusing to me, slightly perverse, that the Haut-Rhin is the southern part of Alsace as opposed to the Bas-Rhin, which is in the northern part of the growing region in Alsace. This is family owned and operated, moderate-sized producer that's been around for many generations. The buyers, and they have 3 generations reflected in their winemaking. Just to remind us all, Alsace is that beautiful area of France that has gone back and forth between 2 countries until after World War II. And thank you, everyone, it has stabilized. But you have significant climatic influence, which the Vosges Mountains to the west. And you have altitude in play too. And it's a relatively dry region. Slopes matter. Southern, south, southeast, southwest slopes matter because they're trying to maximize sunshine. This is a very interesting family-owned and operated winery because they are using in this Riesling a significant portion of fruit from their Grand Cru vineyards, which I think is really cool. And you can tell, because the class is there, the density is there, the length is there. Also, Riesling, is a significant portion of what's planted in Alsace. We're talking like over 20%. So it is a 2017. I could have guessed even 16 also because of that little bit of oxidative nutty character to it. Do we have pictures? I think so, where we have 3 generations, Mark, Jan Leon, and Leon Bayer. I understand that Jan is no longer active in the winery, but it's family owned and operated. So, gee, that may change down the road. That's the young man standing in the center. Looking at their vineyards, it's very interesting. The hillside is not steep, but there is a grade and it does matter. And I think the view of the town is just terrific. Talk about urban planning. It's concentric circles with a couple of old castles peppered in there. And then I think we have a close-up of that as well. I think, frankly, for me, this is really classic Alsace Riesling. And if I were to circle back and tell you why, when I smell and taste that combination of citrus, high-tone citrus, both aromatically and the presence of acidity, tree fruit, ripe apricot, nectarine, peach, stone fruit, tree fruit in the form of green apples, and that floral component, you know, I'm going to strongly consider Riesling when I'm nesting with the deduction. And then why Alsace versus someplace else, even though we know we're in France, because of I think the weight, the mouthfeel, that little bit of TDN, that petrol element that tends to increase with bottle age. I find it very gentle here, which I'm very happy. And bravo for what we would call entry-level Alsace Riesling from the buyers.
So we have two questions. One from Tony. Thanks, Tony, for the question. What is the difference between Riesling and Gewürztraminer? And I would put that, Madeline, squarely in Alsace. Let's talk about Alsatian Riesling
Sure.
and Gewürztraminer.
Absolutely. You know, we're talking about, first of all, a grape, Gewürz, that has tremendous nobility and quality potential in Alsace, every bit as much as Pinot Gris and Riesling. Its florality is dominant. You know, you are in a rose garden. You know, also the mouthfeel will be significantly softer than this. You may get even higher alcohol levels and either an illusion of or actual RS. So, you know, take it down to the dominant aromatics and the mouthfeel. Riesling will have more poignant acidity. The florality will be a secondary or tertiary component.
Wonderful.
And the presence of RS in Riesling, it's very simple. They're moving into that zone with residual sugar if it's a Vendange Tardive or, you know, later harvest. What was the second question?
Second question, and this question I'm going to throw out to maybe Evan and Tim to see if they got this. Akeem said that he got some beeswax on this particular wine. Did you guys get that beeswax? What is that?
I personally didn't. I can understand that, and I'm wondering if sort of the beeswax, whether that's like literally sort of a smell thing or more of a textural element. Oftentimes when I pick up waxiness, it's more of a texture than it is a nose thing. It's a flavor that I would associate more with Semillon, or a flavor textural component more with Semillon and perhaps Southern Rhone glasses. So if it was a texture for you, yeah, that would be absolutely, and that's glycerol, particularly in the sense that we don't have the presence of actual residual sugar here. And in areas, remember that alcohol levels, even a point of alcohol, will add a roundness and a weight to it than the same wine made you know, in a degree or so less of alcohol. So I think that it's terminology, you know, and you're, I think we're all dancing around the same thing, but actually you can pick up a waxiness of aroma in Semillon, particularly. That's where I find it.
I think it's in the flavor and the aftertaste, but it's definitely down the road, you know. Tim, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, the only thing I would add, Akeem, is that don't let one thing like this, one, you know, aromatic or flavor make up your mind. You know, there are exceptions to that rule. Sometimes there are compounds that are really signatures for grape varieties, like green, herbal, and vegetal things in Sauvignon Blanc. But by and large, something like beeswax, you know, don't let it make up your mind. You need more than one piece of information.
And as Evan was talking about the alcohol, I just want to remind those of you who didn't know this, that the alcohol is actually on the back label as well. So sometimes when I'm not actually going to go online to check the text sheet, I'm checking it right here on the back label. All right, I think we have to go. There was a comment that Carrie thought that it might have been ferment. So as we move on to the next wine, Evan, any comments about that pick?
Well, ferment to me, unless you were dealing with a really sweet style, multiple Pitanos in Tokai or something like that, wouldn't be as weighty as this wine would. It would share something more akin to a Trocken style German or Austrian kind of thing in terms of weight and linearity. But the richer styles it could, and there'd also be sort of more of a, I mean, I think the fruit profile could be similar, particularly more on the tree, not so much the orchard fruit, but the tree fruit that was there. So as we move into wine two.
Hold the thought about the Chenin Blanc. We can talk about that later because that's an important thing, Li Meng, if we have time at the end.
Yeah. So a couple of things. First of all, Alsatians are dogs. Alsace is so when you talk about something, Alsacien is spoken to about the region and about the food, but the people themselves are Alsace people. The wines are Alsace wines. I was told that by many in Alsace when I was there. And by the way, the farthest away Appellation Contrôlée from Paris is in fact Martinique. So if anyone wants to put Martinique down as a choice, the AOC is for rum, but nevertheless, it is an Appellation Contrôlée Français. All right, let's move into wine two. As Madeline did, I'm going to just sort of quickly zip through the grid. I think it's important, and she mentioned it, that wines are idiosyncratic depending on what day you're tasting them. So you might write wines down or rate wines or talk about them in a certain way. And depending on you, your mood, you know, fruit day, earth day, flower day, whatever, you're not going to taste the wine exactly the same the next day, the next week, or whatever. But today, what this wine is showing me is, in fact, a nice sort of medium color. I would say it's straw. Some people might push it a little bit more you know, more yellow in there, a little bit of highlighting there. Clearly no bubbles, and not a viscosity akin to the wine that we said before. So that for people who do swirl and look at the legs or the tiering, something which we don't do here because depending on glassware cleanliness and all sorts of other things, it's not necessarily the best tool to use, but you will notice that it seems a little bit lighter. The nose, to me, really is a sort of study in a couple of things. There is obviously a strong citrus element here, and here really much in the form of lemons, and particularly Eureka lemons, maybe not so much Meyer lemons. Fresh and ripe, flesh, definitely some peel zest. There is more of kind of an apple-y pear character to it, or a Asian pear character to it that's there, again showing freshness to it and some ripeness to it as well. Bit of green plum, a character which I find more in my mouth, and some nice characters of floral elements. Blossoms for sure, maybe just a touch of jasmine, and not so much in the dried out potpourri thing, but more in that fresh element of things. In the nose and the mouth, I should say, in the non-fruit things as we move along here. There are some sort of freshness here. I think salad greens is something that's a really good, useful thing to do, or spring peas, because they're not any one sort of thing. Spring peas to me is when you bring up the sweetness of a green element as opposed to an herbal character. And salad greens is just sort of that light, not arugula per se. Arugula is its own descriptor, as we know, but sort of that sort of bright, greenish, soft character. Salad greens are not as strong or as pungent as other greens. So when you're picking up a little salad green, a little spring pea, that brings up a ripeness to me and a sense of freshness there. I do pick up a little bit of a very soft fennelly character, definitely some white mushrooms, a little bit of ginger, picking up just a kiss of that sort of sesame candy, something that's sort of, I think, lazy related in the nose, but definitely earth, and definitely sort of a mineral rocky, chalky sort of character permeates this wine. I'm not finding any animals, thank goodness. And I do feel that there's an oak here, but it's not a strong presence of oak. It's probably blended between, you know, barrels that are slightly older and some stainless steel, not pure and not necessarily new. Definitely some nuttiness here, a little bit of that sort of peanut shelly leesy things, and maybe some fresh nuts like macadamias or pine nuts, no chemicals, no other significant choices. And in the palate, I always get caught. I should drink the wine, swallow it, and then do the palate. But it's dry. The acid is prevalent, medium plus, pushing high depending on your palate's sense of acidity. There's some weight to the wine. It's not what I would call heavy. I mean, medium plus is probably at the top end, but for some of you, you might call it medium. No real phenolics, definitely a tartness of structure, but not nearly as shrill as the Riesling that we came off of. A nice medium plus to long finish. And there's, you know, to me, complexity is there stuff going on there? Are there things to talk about? And I would say that that is the case. There's a little bit of texture on it too. And Akeem picking up a little bit of that butteriness there. That probably speaks a bit to some of that oak, some of that older wood that's there. It's definitely pushed back and not speaking to me of heavy levels of ML or anything like that. So that's what I got. Let's take a look at what we could be if we move into the polls now. Well, we've got Semillon blend. We have Chardonnay, we have Viognier, and we have other, and then we have associated areas with them. We talked a little bit about Semillon before as having occasionally that sort of beeswaxy sort of character. Semillon to me Always has pronounced notes of ripe tree fruit, quinciness, appliness, but also fig. Fig is a really strong character I pick up. They're particularly green figs as well. And again, a creaminess usually in the palate in France. Again, I'm only speaking to France, of course, today. Chardonnay, we know what Chardonnay is, and it can range from the sharpest of sharp to the most amazingly awesome wines of the Côte d'Or. Viognier, we sort of spoke of in past sessions, a much more aromatic, very bright variety, sort of a crash between a Hawaiian fruit stand and a flower orchard. It's just kind of very vibrant and powerful, a little bit more subdued in France than it would be in other parts of the world, like say California, Virginia, even Argentina, places like that. And then
So, Evan,
associated regions.
I thought that with it being all from France, this whole thing would be easier. In a way, it's kind of harder. I have to say, I don't know about everybody else out there, but I don't remember all the wines we put in because we think so far ahead. I don't remember the last wines that we do, and it's hard. I find myself second guessing. I don't know the answer. I don't remember right now.
I mean, I
I'm
think a
wondering
lot
if other people have this problem when you
Yeah.
think that you're just going in on France.
Yeah. Well, when you micro focus in a singular geography, you really have to, put on it. It's a different beret in this case in terms of how you think about things, and whether you approach it by grape type or by region, which I think you can do either one. The sort of micro focus that you have to put here makes you think a little bit differently. So
It makes you think more.
it makes you think more. Yeah.
So it draws your attention, I think, to your what is it, your left brain, and sort of supersedes the perception of the wine's non-vocal elements. So it's trickier. You can fool yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you probably start hyper analyzing wines more because your geographies are limited. Your choices are limited. So I think you feel almost worse or more pressured by knowing that the world has been thinned for you already by virtue of being in a singular place or country.
I think I just want to give it another 15 seconds for those of you who struggle like I do, and don't feel silly for struggling with this, even if you've been with us for a while, because it is a difficult thing to do. And if it's your first time and you're like, wow, these guys are really geeked out. Yes, it's very geeky, but I assure you, if you just take things in bite-sized chunks, you will leave with something fresh. Evan, as we're giving people 15 more seconds, I just would love for you to explain what phenolics are. Sadale maybe was asking that question, and Jennifer was nice enough to give a URL. But Evan, since we have you here, what are phenolics and how does one tell?
Well, we speak to phenolics as sort of the elements of bitterness or sharpness, or as Madeline put it very eloquently, white wine tannin, that we don't speak about in red wines. We don't really speak about red wines being phenolic, although when you're tannic, you are phenolic by definition. But it would be what that presence is in this way white wines present themselves. The two ways you are going to build phenols in white wines are either one, skin contact, and the longer the time spent on the skins, what the French would call, because we're in France today, macération pelliculaire, or the maceration with the skins. The longer you do that, the more bitterness you'll pick up, because obviously tannins are in the skins of the grapes. Or wood, particularly new wood, is going to put tannins on wines very much in white or in red, and these would pronounce themselves not so much in astringency, although they could be, but probably more out of bitterness.
Great. All right, I'm going to end the poll. I hope that helps, Adele. And here we go. Here are the results. We have people overwhelmingly thinking that it's Chardonnay. So did I. So let's hope that those folks are right. And then we have Burgundy, probably by virtue of people picking Chardonnay. So I'm going to stop sharing the results. Evan?
Can you hold it for 1 second before you turn it off there? Can you put it back, or is it too late?
Sure. No.
Put it back for 1 second. I just want to make this added sort of just on along the lines with what we were talking about with the singular thing. Chardonnay, which is the choice of 80% of the people up there, 8 of 10, could be not only in Burgundy, but if you start thinking about your French places, there's a lot of Chardonnay in the Loire Valley as well, too. It's not necessarily highly regarded or appellated the way it is there, but some of these answers can cross multiple appellations. So I just wanted to bring up that it's not necessarily always a one-to-one absolute correlation between grape and place. Thank you for that.
Awesome. All right.
So where are we
And you'll,
going?
yeah, here we go. We're gonna
Where in
go.
the world is Carmen Sandiego? All right. Or for those of you who have small children, you might remember that. We're going to move
We're gonna
into
wait for
our,
the next slide to come on. And for those of you who are bad like me, I just poured my next wine to give it a little bit of time. I didn't get to pre-pour all my wine,
oh, we're
so
not, we're not in Alsace anymore.
yep, we're not in Alsace.
We're not in Kansas either. Where are we? We are on Chantre. If I say Chantre, some people are going to say Burgundy, and that is in fact part of Burgundy. And we're at the estate of Marie-Pierre Monsiat. She is in Puy, specifically Puy. Puy is an interesting term because Puy, we're going to talk about it more specifically in a minute in Puy-Fouissé, but don't get that confused with Puy-Fumé. Puy-sur-Loire is a town in the Loire Valley in the Eastern Loire, famous for its Sauvignon Blanc, hence Fumé, Puy-Fumé, as in Fumé Blanc, where Puy-Fouissé, where Madame Monsiat is located in the Mâconnais, which is in the sort of middle southern-ish part of Burgundy in the Mâconnais area. So it is not the Côte d'Or, i.e. it's not Meursault and Chassagne-Montrachet. It's not Chablis, which is up further north and actually closer to Paris than it is to the rest of Burgundy. And it's certainly not further south in either, or north, I should say, in the Chalonnais, and definitely not in Beaujolais. So we are deep in the heart of the Mâconnais. And Puy-Fouissé is probably the most celebrated part of this area. It used to be, quote unquote, considered to be the best part of the area when it was sort of discovered in some of the vineyards that are there in the greater communes of Fouissé and Soultray and Chantre, where Madame Monsiat is, and Vergisson. Are considered to be highly good areas, but as people have been migrating from other parts into Burgundy, other parts of the Mâconnais are starting to get very, very important. So there's three main appellations, and this is just for your own edification. You don't have to memorize that, but there's Puy-Fouissé, of course, but there's also another area adjacent called Puy-Loché and another called Puy-Venzel. But those four communes of Fouissé, which are Fouissé, Soultray, Chantre, and Vergisson, are where we're talking about here, and specifically in Fouissé. Puy-Fouissé became very popular in the States, for those of you who are like me, old enough to remember when Americans could figure out how to pronounce it. And then they got all excited, and then Puy-Fouissé was on every wine list in America in the 60s and 70s. Then it was overproduced. Then the quality went to merde, and then over time it's been sort of restored back again. And I think some of the better examples of Puy-Fouissé, of which I think this is a lovely one, are evident as to why the appellation was described before. Marie-Pierre, who I think we'll have in a future picture down the road, is a third generation, or I should say sixth generation rather, of her family making wine. They've been doing this in 1871 in Puy-Fouissé, and she has a property of about 54 acres in the area. And it speaks very much to the sort of minerality that you find here. Those areas around Soultray and Vergisson particularly have a strong mineral presence because of the sort of hard coral fossilized soil material that they're made from. But this is, I think, a very good example of what it is. What's a little bit striking about this wine, and I don't know if anybody else picked it up, is if you look at the vintage on it, it's an 18. And what do we know about 18 in France? For anybody who happened to make themselves over there, I was over there, it was really, really warm. So there's a more overt fruit presence and a greater weight presence than one might be typically associating with, quote unquote, a classic, although classic in the time of climate change is being redefined these days, but having the fruit element a little bit more forward, those notes of sort of the lemon being more preserved or riper lemon, the other tree fruit characters being a little bit riper than they would be typically, where you would have the citric linearity and that stronger mineral component being a little bit more forward. And that's just a function of Mother Nature in that particular year,
Evan?
but well-regarded property.
Evan, why is it not Grenache Blanc or Roussanne? This is a question from Lisa.
Yeah, well, Grenache Blanc and Roussanne, which are grapes that we would find down in the southern Rhone, whether they be in White Châteauneuf-du-Pape or White Côte-du-Rhône or something like that. First of all, they are much weightier than this. So those wines would be more akin to sort of like the first wine we had, but even on more steroids than that. There'd be sort of a generous big base bottom to those wines. And the nature of the fruit character there would not be quite as defined. They would have a sort of nice round white fruit character, a soft floral character. Roussan has the actual definition, the sort of what they talk about it, not that we can find too many of them here, but white cherry is probably the most classic Roussan flavor, along with some rich stone fruits. Grenache Blanc is quite neutral. This wine has a little bit too much fruit presence for that. It's really more about texture, and that's what its primary purpose is in white Rhone blends.
Great. All right. We have to move on to the next wine. Thank you, Evan. Tim, you're up.
Yeah, hi everybody. So obviously we've gone from white wine to rosé. And in certain parts of the country, we call these wines pink or pank. If you're in Texas, it's pank. And so I want to ask my two MS colleagues an MS trivia question, okay, Evan and Maddie. So who is the first Texas-born master sommelier?
Not Gaiser?
Texas born or Texas living in Texas?
Texas-born master sommelier.
Ooh, somebody who doesn't live there anymore, probably, but I don't know who that would be.
James, Melissa?
Me.
You?
Wow.
You?
Yes, we shocking.
Ah.
Yes.
I thought you were from San Francisco.
Born in Mercedes, Texas, which is in the Rio Grande Valley, and moved to Albuquerque when I was 8. So there you are.
Well, there you are. Do you have Spurs on today? Could you actually demonstrate that for us? Or
What's that?
cowboy boots or Spurs? Nothing that would actually give us living proof?
No. I will owe my parents for several lifetimes for moving. I'll just say that. No offense to the great Republic of Texas. Okay, moving on. Pink wine, rosé. But this is for Li Meng. Li Meng, this is not pink. It's, dare I say it? Dare.
Salmon.
It's
Saumon.
Saumon.
Salmon. Yes.
Saumon.
So it's
Saumon.
bright, it's clear, salmon, no
Yep.
rim variation, of course. The fruit is predominantly red. What a surprise. On this, I like the sour cherry, strawberry, and raspberry, and plum. These are all underripe, tart, fresh. And black fruit, for me, is kind of a stretch on this. Maybe a little black cherry that is fresh. Citrus fruit, yes. I definitely like the pink grapefruit and tangerine calls. Again, fresh, flesh. And I would add peel here, like tangerine peel. Touch of, I think watermelon is the best call in that next line. Fresh again, no stone fruit. And I would definitely add some floral elements. For me, rose, I like hibiscus, smells kind of like vitamin C, and orange blossom, and they are all fresh. And please, next slide. Wow, that's just wonderful. Okay, no vegetal qualities, herbal. I like verbena, laurel bay, and chamomile. Red licorice, good call. Inorganic earth, dirt, no. But mineral and saline and pretty pronounced mineral on the mid palate. Oak aging, don't think so. It's probably done in large tanks, maybe not stainless steel, but maybe concrete tanks. No oxidation, although the color tells you that this wine really is hitting its stride, and it's going to start to show oxidation in the color first, and then, over the rest of the nose and the palate. No chemical compounds, obviously. In perceived winemaking choices, you got skin contact, right? And you probably have a rosé that was done with limited skin contact, who knows, 24, 36, 40 hours worth. Okay, structure, it is fermented dry, acid medium plus. Phenols, yeah, low. And here we could almost say these are tannins, obviously made from red grapes, yeah. Alcohol is medium plus. The texture finish is lean, tart, clean, refreshing, delicious. If it's too hot to drink wine like this, I don't know, drink beer, who knows? The finish is medium plus, and the complexity is medium plus, and it is delightful. Okay, moving on. Now this wine actually presents a very curious challenge because, there are French rosés made in any number of different places, especially along the Mediterranean coast or appellations nearby, and from different blends of grapes or different grapes. So with that, why don't you go ahead and vote?
Tim, can I just interject to say this is not a toss-off pink wine. This is,
No,
the
No.
aromatics are so
No.
special on this wine. You know,
Yes.
it's so, and it follows through sleek and delicious. But I just think that that fragrance is shockingly complex.
Mhm.
And this is a place that, you know, they intend to make this.
Yep.
It is
So-
a wine of intent, for sure.
So let me
Yes.
ask a question here. A few weeks, maybe 2 seminars ago, we did a Klein Mourvedre Rosé. I bring this up because Sadel's got a really great question here. The question is, I made the silly mistake of just realizing that all of these wines are French, LOL. If we didn't have that knowledge, why would this definitely take us to France over the New World, for example? And I'm thinking this is so different from that Klein Mourvedre Rosé, for instance. So what is French about it?
Well, you know, there's a profound mineral quality to it, right? And I seem to recall that Klein wine, the alcohol was higher. It was not a fruit bomb, but it was really considerably fruitier. This wine has higher acid. It has less alcohol. And the middle of the wine is all about this saline, almost chalky quality. So.
Yeah, there's a texture on it. I would just add, Tim, to it that to your point, whether it's the phenols from the skin contact or whatever, but it has sort of like a powdery tannin to it, or a powdery phenolic character to it. And I concur with you that sort of that play between, call it minerality, call it a salinity, particularly if these grapes happen to be near a sea or an ocean or something like that, definitely are going to give you something that's different. But just the way the fruit pronounces itself, there's a subtlety to it that you're not going to necessarily see in California.
Yep.
Great. And by no means was I trying to say that this is a Mourvedre Rosé. I just was throwing out that we did taste one. And just a quick reminder to everyone who's on the chat, if you are writing to us on the chat and you want everyone to see your comments, make sure you select all panelists and attendees. And with that, Tim, I'm going to stop the poll and I'm going to share the results. Here we are. 81%, right at the very top. Do you say Chinso or Cinso?
Senso.
Senso.
That's interesting because I'm surprised more people didn't go for Mourvedre, you know, thinking of Bandol Rosé. And who is it? Somebody said on the side, Lisa.
Is it too delicate?
She expected Mourvedre Rosé to be a little bit darker. Yeah, I would agree, possibly. And also a little bit more on the finish, a little bit more tannin, because Mourvedre can be a pretty tannic grape. That being said, to me, what really stands in this is this really ripe strawberry fruit profile and the savory qualities, which to me are Grenache. And there's Grenache in this. The way it breaks down, and by the way, this is Laird Bernard, and they're dedicated to making rosé. God bless them. I think the world cannot have enough kind of wine like this. That's all I'll say. It's 46% Senso, 27% Grenache, 11% Mourvedre, 9% Roll, which is Vermentino in any other place, and then 7% Syrah. So yeah, I would just say that it's, you know, to me, very savory, savory type notes, floral, verbena, almost Provençal spices. And if you've ever been in the Côte de Provence, and the last time I was there was 2 years ago in early May, and it smells like Provençal herbs when you walk outside. It's extraordinary.
Tim,
So
why
let's
not Pinot Noir? Why
not
not
Pinot Noir? That's
right.
great, because a very Pinot Noir rosé, even in places like Mercure or Coteau de Champenoise or things like that, very pure, red fruited, higher acid, and not savory like this. You know, so the white pepper and all the, you know, bay laurel and things like that, it's just not there.
So let's see what it is. Andrea, will you move? Awesome. So we're already in France. So we're now going from Burgundy and going back.
I see what we're doing. We're going down, we're going up, we're going down. Okay.
Yeah, we're not starting from the world each time.
Kind of like a French bungee jump, reverse bungee jump.
So here we are. We didn't go all the way back out. So south. Tim, where are we?
We are in the Côte de Provence, which is here. We're about 15 miles, you know, east of where Les Baux is, and Aix-en-Provence. We're probably, 15 miles from the Mediterranean. Elevation's about 700 feet. And we're on limestone and calcareous soils. And again, that breakdown to different grapes. This wine is done completely from certified organic vineyards. And it's done in a combination of stainless steel and epoxy lined resin, no oak aging whatsoever. I think the total maceration fermentation time is less than 10 days. So it's everything about it is made to preserve freshness and purity of fruit, but also that really pretty unmistakable stamp of chalk and calcareous soil. Just lovely wine. Yeah. And this wine always tastes better there. Wouldn't you agree, Evan and Madeline? Wine
I'm not
always
torturing myself. It tastes just fine in Detroit.
Yeah, no, I think what you bring up, Tim, though, which I think is so important, and for those people who have scratched their heads when they go out and spend, $25 and $30 a bottle for Provençal rosé that has, about as much interest as a bad rerun that you've seen 75 times, or becomes sort of, in that sort of, well, Pinot Grigio is Italian for no flavors. So many of the Provençal rosés these days are relatively, dare I say, innocuous. And you come across a wine like this that has so much character, so much personality, is dedicated to the production of a wine and intentionally made rosé of character that it just gives you hope. It gives you great pleasure. And yes, of course, if you were sitting there in that pastel picture, staring off at the Mediterranean in the background there, it would be great, but it tastes just good. And if the weather's lovely on a beautiful day, it would be nice. I will tell you, though, that to validate what Tim says, there are times when you go to places in Provence and you are there in the moment, in the time, or other beautiful parts of the world, where you come home and you order the same wine and you realize that your impression was colored very deeply by where you were, who you were with, the environment and the landscape, and that the wine itself is, this is a wine that's not that way.
Yeah, context is everything, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right.
All right. Some very beautiful but very different landscapes as we moved from wine 1 to wine 3 for sure. Tim, we're going to have you do wine number 4.
Okay.
Oh, here's the lavender.
Ooh, I love that picture.
Oh, let's go there. Oh, yes.
Next MTW live tasting.
Right.
You say that smells wonderful too, the lavender. Okay. And now for something completely different, everybody, the first red wine. So let's take a look at it. You can still read through it a little bit. So stay bright, reflect some light. I would say this is kind of a ruby purple. So it is red and purple together, predominantly purple. It fades out to a much lighter magenta, fuchsia, purple pink type rim, which is, a sign of relative youth. Okay. And then on the nose and the palate, it's a combination of red and black fruits, and it's pretty much 50-50. For the red fruits, I'm thinking tart red cherry, cranberry, red currant, red raspberry. And then if I would jump ahead to the vegetal, even though I group it in fruit, I would say some rhubarb and even pomegranate. So there are some really sour red things, underripe, fresh and ripe. And then black cherry, and to me, really blackberry and black currant. So there are black fruits, but they're really tart. So that to me speaks of, this is a combination of things going on. We've got some really good quality vineyards here where the yields are low. You've got a lot of intensity, but at the same time, it's not a warm place. So the grapes don't get overly ripe. It's because even the black fruit is really bright and fresh and popping. Anything stone fruit? No. Citrus fruit? No. Floral, there's some lovely rose and violet above the glass. That's where you find it. And yes, a little bit of lavender, and they are fresh. Okay. And then moving on. And then I say with this, really for the first time, these first 4 wines and this first red wine, the non-fruit here is really the main event. So beyond the floral qualities, now we get into their herbal, vegetal, savory type things, and they really dominate the wine. And they're green. So I like dark leafy greens, arugula, but I especially like green peppers, and moving down a couple of lines, green peppercorns. So those 2 things to me jump out of the glass, and they really dominate, especially the palate of the wine. Otherwise, there's some white mushrooms, absolutely. There's a little spice quality you might call ginger root. I like black licorice as a call. Tobacco leaf, laurel bay leaf. Again, the wine is really green, and that's interesting because of how much fruit you perceive when you take an initial look at it. But the green qualities really dominate the nose and the palate. Okay, there is both organic and inorganic. So there is forest floor, turn soil, things like that. And yet at the same time, the palate is really chalky, surprisingly chalky. And yeah, that's interesting just for a red wine. No animals were located in this wine. Oak aging, yes, low in terms of its impact and a little bit of oxidative quality in terms of almond and walnut and things like that. No chemical compounds. But I do think that part of that whole green presentation, that savory quality, are stems. So stem inclusion was part of the winemaking, in which case you've got partial whole cluster. That would also account for, by the way, all the depth of blue pigment in the color. All right. And then to finish it out, this wine is fermented dry, almost bone dry. The acid is medium plus. The alcohol is medium, tannins medium plus. The texture, it is lean and tart and chalky and stemmy. Kind of a disconnect from how fruit intense the nose is. The palate is really quite different. The finish is long in my book, and the complexity is medium plus. Okay, that's quite a bit in the first red wine.
It's a lot in a first red wine. And again, I stand by how hard this tasting has just become. It's
Wow.
It's amazing. So your choices: Gamay, Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon. A lot of choices here. Let's see where people go. If you have already seen the answers, definitely give us what you thought it was before you saw the answers. And of course, with that, as Evans mentioned before, there are a lot of varieties here that do cross over in different parts as well. So there we go. Actually, not so much in this particular red wine, but yes, definitely you have your work cut out here. We'll give everyone about 30 seconds. Tim, in 30 seconds, what kind of hint can you give them without giving it away?
Well, okay, as Inigo Montoya would say, I'm going to sum up. Gamay, I'm looking for carbonic maceration and a real tutti fruity candied fruit quality. Cabernet Franc blend, what am I looking for? Pronounced green qualities from pyrazines. Yeah. Cabernet Sauvignon blend, especially in France, you would have some of that green quality, but you would have tannin regardless of where you are, because Cabernet is just the most tannic member of the Cabernet Sauvignon family. Okay.
Awesome. All right, let's end the poll and let's see where people are at. We've got an overwhelming Cabernet Franc at 76%. We've got some Gamay, so I do think that you might want to explain Cabernet Franc versus Gamay a little bit. And then at the very last place, Cabernet Sauvignon. I think it's pretty obvious that's not a Cabernet Sauvignon given the scoring. And then I think by virtue of Cabernet Franc being selected, people were mostly in Loire Valley. Tim?
Yeah. Well, the green quality of the pyrazines should rule out Gamay. Okay. And this wine is really green on the palate, and it's stemmy, and it's really strict. It reminds me of Catholic school. Okay. We're going to stop right there. So the Gamay, I'm just not getting any carbonic or tutti frutti or Hello Kitty. It's just not there. I don't get enough tannin, though, to take me to Cabernet Sauvignon. And if it's Bordeaux, odds are, if it's quality, it's going to have some new oak on it. And I don't get that at all. In fact, I don't know about you, but there's almost the intensity of the oak here is really, really low. So, in terms of winemaking, that's not something you associated with, an estate in Bordeaux that's making high quality wine.
Let's see if people are right. Let's see where we are in the world. Andrea, thank you. And we are definitely coming back up, going up sort of northwest a little here, Loire Valley. And I love this comment that this one was tough because I haven't had enough Cabernet Franc. I am so happy that here you have a benchmark Cabernet Franc that you could really wrap your brain around for the next Cabernet Franc that you're going to have. Tim?
Yeah. So, this is a family-owned domain, very small. This is Beatrice and Pascal Lambert. And I mean, they make a little bit of Chenin Blanc, but mainly what they do is make Chinon. So this is Chinon. It's south of the Loire River. It's right next to a tributary called the Vienne, which runs south from the Loire. And this is a great photograph because look at that field that's vacant, that's fallow at the moment, and look at the color. So you can see how much chalk, limestone, calcareous, tufa, everything having to do with basically limestone or variations of. And you really get that in the wine. It's got a real chalk dust, chalky type texture. The grapes here are fine biodynamically. It's 100% Cabernet Franc. It is done entirely in concrete tanks, so no oak was used whatsoever. And I think that's a wonderful thing. So they make at least 5 different Chinons. This is called Les Terrasses. There's a little bit of clay in the soil in this particular wine. The vines are 10 to 25 years old. But to me, this is an unmistakable representation of Loire Valley Cabernet Franc. So who is mentioning that? Okay, so Sadal, as your attorney, this is what I think you should do. You got to own, everybody who's listening to this, as professional tasters, we have to own pyrazines. So bell pepper, green grass, all that stuff. And if you have trouble, you should take a green bell pepper and put it in your refrigerator in a bowl, and you should just leave it. And then after a week, it's going to start to melt. And every time you open the refrigerator, you're going to be assaulted by pyrazines. At some point, your brain is going to say to you, I've had enough. And at that point, then you'll always get pyrazines, even in the next county, but you should take the bell pepper outside and throw it away because it's really.
And buy a new refrigerator. Yes.
What's that? Yeah, you might need
buy a new refrigerator.
Soda. So anyway, yes, pyrazines are something that students often have challenges with. So.
I do think it's worth pointing out, as we talked about crossovers before, that there's a whole part of Bordeaux where Cabernet Franc is actually quite important on the right bank. But again, because of the nature of the blends and the nature of the structure and the weather, those wines are firmer than Chinon is, particularly if the Chinon has not spent any time in oak, and this one being concrete. Literally, the tannins you're picking off are grape skin and perhaps a little bit of stem. I'm not sure how much, whole cluster that they do within that, but it really is beautiful. I love the label too. I don't know if people saw that label, but it was various shades of red and pink, which speak, I think, to the different kinds of Chinons that they make. And because Chinon, you can make Cabernet Franc into a rosé, you can make it into a light red wine, you can make it into a more serious wine. And I thought it spoke to that. A little concerned about the child labor I see on the picture here, but that's not ours to quibble with. She's playing.
I want to add something too. I mean, we do all this analysis, perceive, define, but there is a visceral element to recognizing wine that I want to speak to. If you sit with the fragrance in this wine for 2 or 3 days, which is a good reason not to down these, right away, even though if you're really enjoying them, because a lot of effort has gone into picking out killer examples of type. This is Chinon aromatically, to me. And it's green, but it's not just bell pepper. I always think of green coffee beans when I think of Chinon, and also aromatically. And I put this in the chat room. If you're considering Bordelaise varieties or even right bank Bordeaux, you're going to have harder, more drying tannins, very specifically, and frankly, more dark berry fruit. But however you want to define it, and you come up with your own whimsical, mystical description of this aroma is worth memorizing. Don't you think, Tim?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to piggyback on what Evan said. Evan made a great point, about right bank Bordeaux and places like Saint-Emilion and Satellites. But here, in that particular place, you have Merlot blended in, and the wines are just softer and they're a lot prettier and they're friendlier. This, by comparison on the palate, is acidic, it's austere, it's chalky, and it needs 3 to 5 years, or it needs, something with goat cheese, something with acid, to pair it with. Yeah.
Yeah, and then lastly, as we move into the next wine, Madeline, I want to pick up on what you were saying in terms of key markers. For me, Cabernet Franc, it's sort of leaves. So whether that's currant leaves, whether that's bay leaves, whether that's to a lesser degree sage leaves, tobacco leaves, anything that's leafy is going to be a strong marker, in addition to peppers, jalapenos, bell peppers, etc. But leafiness is a very classic Cabernet Franc marker for me.
Great. We're going to go on to wine number 5. And for those of you who have more than one glass, I would really recommend, if you're trying to get those markers down, having 2 glasses at least. For sure, having 6 glasses would be great, but having 2 glasses kind of helps you see the difference between this or that. Evan, wine
Yeah.
number 5.
Well, this wine is, as you approach it, it's a very different wine, certainly in terms of personality. That, you know, the quality of the color is not quite as rich and not quite as deep. It's a little bit more clear. You can read through it a bit more. It's still in that sort of ruby vein, but not with quite as much intensity. And the tearing is you sort of roll the wine around the glass a little bit and pull it back and hold it against a white piece of paper. It's just soft. There's a little bit of it going on there, which suggests extraction, dry extract, etc. And expect, you know, you're going to get a wine of some, for lack of a better word, oomph to it. In the nose, it's a combination of primarily red, but with a little black fruit. And whether you call it raspberries, cherries, strawberries, plums, that's sort of up to you. And it's at once sort of very ripe. There's a juiciness to the fruit, but it's a little bit desiccated too, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just an is thing that suggests, again, a strong ripeness. No blue fruits here. And the black fruit, again, is sort of in that tartar realm of black fruits, but just a subcurrent. It's obviously, to me at least, it's red fruit dominated. And once again, sort of at once ripe, but slightly desiccated character there. No citrus, no stones. Very strong floral components here. Again, sort of in that Provençal kind of note that we talked about before. In fact, it would be interesting if you smell this wine and then go back and smell the rosé if you actually have it in a second glass, and see if you can connect the dots between the genre of floral elements that are there together, because I think they reflect each other just a little bit, and they're fresh. They're not sort of this dried out notes. Non-fruit, I think there's some there for sure. I do think there's a tremendous amount of fruit on this wine. I wouldn't call it a fruit bomb, but the fruit there is very expressive. However, in the non-fruit elements, next slide, please. I'm finding combinations of some fennel, some licorice, again, that leafy greens. There is that sort of, I think arugula is a good call here because there's a pepperiness to it. And those of you who have arugula in your salads or even saute it or whatever, one of the things that we love so much about arugula is that peppery sort of nutty type of character. Mushrooms for sure, olives for sure, beetroot, distinctively more savory than the beet itself. Whatever kind of herbs you want there, yeah, you've got them, and you could throw them all together in that Provençal-esque bow and call it garrigue, and you would be, I think, appropriately correct here. Some pepperiness for sure, whether that's sort of the soft, sweet smokiness of paprika or that white pepper subtlety or even a green peppercorn thing. Not black cracked, I don't think, but it's definitely there. A little bit of turned dirt and forest floor, some minerals for sure. There is a meatiness to this wine. It's not as strong as some others I've had. It's not like charcuterie or pastrami or anything, but there is a soft meatiness underneath there. There's some older wood there, which I think pronounces itself in some oxidative notes, but also adds a little bit of kind of some sweetness to those other herbal notes we had before. No perceived chemical compounds, no animals were killed and harmed in the making of this wine. And then the wine itself is dry. The acids are solid, medium plus for sure. I wouldn't go much higher than that. The alcohol on it is rich. I'm definitely getting a warming of my chest cavity for sure, suggesting a warmer climate or a warmer year. The tannins on it are present. Again, depending on how we measure tannins, there is grip on it, but the tannins themselves are not astringent. So it's important as we measure tannins to look at them not only in the context of volume, but in the context of quality as well too. You can have something that's low in tannin content, but the tannins themselves are bitter and astringent. You can have wines that are higher in tannin content, but those tannins are well managed and treated as such that they're softer and smoother and, dare I say, sort of more like fine sandpaper as opposed to the coarse sandpaper that you have. Texture, this is one where I would go back and forth. I'd say there's a roundness to it, but it finishes a bit dry, which is why I think gritty and astringent is probably a decent call, although I could see somebody going rounder and smoother on it. I think the finish on it is solid. It's nice and between medium plus and long, and I think the complexity on it is quite good. There's, again, a lot to discuss with this wine, and our discussion factor suggests by definition complexity.
All right, so we're going to go to our choices here and start the poll. We got Grenache, Pinot, Pinot Noir, I should say, and Syrah. And if you thought of something other and were a little confounded by this wine, let us know for sure. Evan, what can you help with narrowing
Yeah,
things
just
down?
well, sure. First of all, Pinot Noir is always going to give you sort of, albeit through differentiations and selections and clones, sort of a uniformity. It's a single variety wine. We don't usually blend Pinot Noir as a still table wine with other grapes. Of course, we do for champagne style wines with White and Meunier and all that, but that's a completely different animal. So there isn't that sort of singularity of voice here that I would necessarily expect with Pinot Noir. I've been fooled, but that's not what I'm expecting. Grenache versus Syrah is a blend. Grenache is more red fruited and softer and creamier. Syrah is dark, blacker fruited and a little bit more austere and a little bit more tannic, a little bit more peppery or meaty. The blend suggests that your Grenache can have some Syrah, your Syrah can have some Grenache, and oftentimes those go hand in hand together. And then as you associate out your regions, think about where some of those grapes could come from. You're probably sitting there going, how come you don't have Burgundy down there as your region when I see Pinot Noir up top? Well, people forget that if you go into the Eastern Loire Valley in places like Sancerre, there's a significant amount of Pinot Noir and red Sancerre made. So again, this is as much of a geography lesson about a country as it is about putting grapes and places together. And it just reminds you that in a country that's as relatively small as France is, how much is going on, how much diversity there actually is, be it in the wine, be it in the cheeses. This is a country with over 400 different cheeses, or be it in the food. For a little tiny country, got a big voice.
I really feel like we need to do a cheese, and this would have been cool to do a French cheese with this. All right, here we go. We're sharing the results. So 65% Grenache and 35% Syrah, nothing else. So I think it is worth trying to differentiate between Grenache and Syrah here, because you have two very distinct camps, 1/3 versus 2/3. And then folks are a majority in Rhone. So what do you think, Evan, before we share the results?
Well, I think before we share the results, if you add the two of those together, you're at 100%. So clearly nobody went into the Pinot Noir camp or the other camp. And I think you could make arguments based on the profiles of these that there may be both of those grapes in there. And as I just mentioned earlier, we often do find those two grapes together. Rhone is a good place to find it, but tip of the beret to the people who said Languedoc-Roussillon, because particularly in the Languedoc, there's increasingly more Syrah being planted, not just in the sort of eastern outpost of Nîmes or places like that that sort of sit between the Rhone and the Languedoc proper in the area around Nîmes. But don't forget those. But Rhone is obviously where you're going to see these grapes play most often, and that was 80+% of the choices.
Great. Let's see if Rhone is right. So
let's reverse bungee jump back up into the air.
Get
and
up.
Then shoot ourselves back down.
Yep. Here we are.
And here we are, Domaine du Terme. Domaine du Terme sits in the hamlet of Gigondas. Gigondas, as many of you know, used to at one point be a Côte-du-Rhône village and was one of the first villages to successfully petition for and gain status as being its own appellation. And obviously the complexity of Gigondas vis-a-vis its neighbors stands out. It is a wine that by definition and by law has to be lion's share Grenache. Many of the wines that you find in France are 100% Grenache, and getting that level of complexity and depth and richness out of pure Grenache really demands that it comes from the right place. But oftentimes you will find a little bit of Syrah blended into it, such as what you find here. And I'm just a big fan of Gigondas. It happens to be one of my favorite Rhone red wines, and it happens to be near where a good friend of mine lives. So I spend a lot of time not too far away from Gigondas that's there. Syrah versus Grenache. Again, remember what we talked about before and what I sort of alluded to in a very simplistic comparison that Grenache tends to be red fruited. Obviously, if you really reduce the concentrations on it, you can get darker characters out of it, but it tends to be sort of a medium to deeper red character. By looking at this wine, you can also tell the color's a little bit lighter. Grenache drops color quicker than Syrah does. Syrah holds on to its pigmentation longer, and Syrah is definitely darker, blacker, inkier. The meatiness that you find is going to be really Syrah driven, but the fact that it, in this particular case, is only 20%, or not even, I think it's 15% of the blend on this wine, means that it's going to be a back note to the complexity and character of this, again, very well regarded spot for Grenache.
Right.
And yes, Robert, Nîmes is part of the Rhone Valley, not Languedoc. That's true. It's sort of considered to be the gateway into the Languedoc area, but it is definitely Rhone, absolutely Rhone. All right. So what else
Dang,
can
we
we
have
tell?
some geeks in the crowd today, Evan.
Yeah, I love it.
I
I
love
love it.
it.
This is a lovely property. It's owned by the Godin family. Anne-Marie is the daughter of Roland. Roland used to be the winemaker. He's gradually handing the reins of the winery over to his daughter, who's increasingly in charge. It's a great property. It's been around since, I don't know, 1900, which makes it younger than the wine I talked about earlier in Burgundy that was dated back to 1871, but nevertheless, how many 1900 wineries are sitting around from California right now? It's 27 acres that they have in Gigondas, although they make a really killer Vaqueras as well too, which is actually my favorite wine of theirs. And they make a little bit of Sablé too. The wine comes just in the shadows of the Dentelle du Montmirail. The Dentelle means the teeth. And if you look at that picture, actually both pictures, it shows you sort of like your lower teeth of what you have there. And it's a very classic and stands out in the landscape as you're driving through the Southern Rhone Valley. And it is a really lovely, beautiful part of the world, making some absolutely lovely wines. What's interesting here, I thought I would point it out because, you know, we don't consider the French necessarily all the time to be as hip as we can be in terms of marketing, with the exception of the small volumes of wine that they sell abroad, most of which comes to the United States. All of their wine is sold DTC out of their tasting room in the main square of Gigondas, which means that they're a very forward-thinking winery, probably more profitable if they're selling their wines direct, but it speaks to a fairly modern approach towards wine, which is, you know, not everyone's going to always go out to the vineyards, but in the little town of Gigondas proper, which is pretty little, they right on the main square sell most of their wine. I thought that was awfully
DTC,
cool.
for those of you who don't know,
Direct
is
to
direct to
consumer.
consumer.
Sorry. Yeah.
That's okay. Evan, Lisa's got a great question, and I love that we've got folks in the audience who are answering her too. What would you pair this Gigondas with?
Oh, Gigondas is, you know, it's a fairly flexible wine. You know, that's what's sort of interesting because of the high percentage of Grenache in it. You don't necessarily have to, like you would with your Syrah-dominated wines, lean towards sort of the red meat things. You could actually have this with a lot of poultry dishes. You could have it with pork, and for those of you who eat veal, you could have it with veal. But it does probably lend itself more to sort of stews, red meat dishes, grills, particularly if you're a fan of taking, like, if you have herbs in your yard and you take, you know, go out to your yard as you hit your grill and throw in some like branches of rosemary or, you know, other fresh herbs, or even use them as brushes, dip them in olive oil and you know, just dredge them over your meat. Picking up on the herbal note would be really good. Anything with olives, you know, a little bit of like a tapenade type preparation on the side, just sort of pull your wine through your maybe gosh, thing like a brochette of lamb or beef with maybe some peppers or something, and then grilled over herbs, and then maybe just pull it through a little bit of tapenade as you bring it to your mouth would be good. Stews, a lot of dishes that are one pot heartier meals would be good. Be careful, it's actually relatively delicate, so I don't think I'd want something quite as rib sticking as cassoulet, which I think is what a lot of people think about in this part of the world. Yeah, puttanesca would be a very good call. Pasta puttanesca would be excellent. But anything that sort of plays in that kind of vein, beef daube would be really nice. A lamb stew with simple fall vegetables would be lovely. It's a big wine, but it's a subtle wine too. It's not, it doesn't command sort of the attention that, say, I don't know, California's Zinfandel or Petit Syrah would.
Excellent. Evan, we're going to move on to the last wine and going back to Madeline. And I just want to say a shout out to Andrea from our team who's pulled together these pictures. For me, seeing these terroir photos is just such a great way to place these wines if we can't travel there. So thanks for doing that. And I also want to shout out to the long maps that we're using for this particular seminar. DeLong, DELONG wine.com. I just love their maps. And since we are staying in France, we just used all of their detailed maps on France here today. All right, last wine.
To your terrific point, before I pick up well, I've been picking up this glass a lot. You can tell by the level I'm spitting it out, though. Even though I'm not driving in Detroit, but when you look at pictures of the topography of the region, you combine that with, frankly, Google Earth Maps and DeLong, and what is on the front and back labels, the experience of the wine, and that much knowledge about it, you own it. I can't overstate that. It's that's what helps me remember. You can go down so many rabbit holes and worry how you're going to remember all this stuff, but my simple tricks for doing just that. So thanks for bringing up the pictures of the topography. Okay, wine number 6, the Caboose. Yay! I have to tell you, I've been enjoying this wine tremendously. And I am, per usual, going to overstate paying attention to how it looks. Hold it against a white surface. Just turn it. It is staining the glass. This is not a large, thin-skinned red grape variety. Again, the color will often set you free when you're caught in initial deductions and you don't know where to go. You might want to circle back gently to how it looks. Also, it adheres. It clings, which actually speaks to possibly more than modest alcohol levels. Where are we moving? Probably upwards of 13.5, even just looking at it. I'm not so much about the numbers, but what it tells me about the wine. Certainly a very dark ruby. The rim is very interesting because it's just moving away from the monochrome of the dark ruby in the center. It's starting to lighten slightly, so it's showing a little bit of bottle age without yellow hints. So that said, both the aroma is so forthcoming. Even if you were only breathing out of one nostril, you would get this aromatic. And it is, albeit young, showing complexity in its youth, which I think is just thrilling, and it speaks to quality. So what do we have here? I think black fruit leads, frankly, though I think there's a combination of black and red. And I think what's really neat about this is you have perfectly ripe, take your pick. I'm going to call black cherry, maybe blackberry, and some red plum, perfectly ripe, but still with gently mouthwatering acidity. There's no hint of overripeness in the aromatics of this wine. And the acidity carries through on the palate as well and makes the wine lifted and refreshing. Go down to floral, very interesting. This is dried floral character. It's a little bit of a potpourri sense if you're trying to tell the difference between, fresh and dry, just imagining burying your face in a bouquet versus, playing with dried flowers and putting them up to your nose. And it's a back note, but it's a neat back note because it adds a prettiness to the aromatic. Let's go to the next panel. Very complex nose and very attractive nose. Now, it's interesting, green vegetable, I would, be the editor here and add pyrazine in there in the form of green bell pepper, but certainly not as dominant as it was, it doesn't pull you towards it, but it's definitely in there as it did on the Chinon. I'll go down to herbal, and for sure there's a cool element that could come from alcohol as well. So mint, maybe a little eucalyptus, tobacco leaf. So there's a green leafy or herbal character, but again, a combination of fresh and dried. And then, skip on down to both earth elements, organic and inorganic. I think a combo of both, and it's really neat. And you can I pick up more sort of forest flora. This is the time of year we're all gardening, that turned earth combined with green, but also on the palate, especially sort of lifted by that acidity is the stony graphite character of this wine. Oak aging, yes, but, beautifully integrated. It's just sort of, a little bit of vanilla and sweet baking spices, but, just enough in the soup, not too much. I'm going to disagree with no animals in this wine. I think there's a teeny little bit of leather, just like really expensive saddle leather. Think of like a Coach bag, but I don't think it's overt Brettanomyces. Let's put it that way. Oxidative, just enough to tell us that, you know, it's moving along. It wasn't bottled yesterday. And the finish, and well, don't get ahead of yourself, Madeline. Let's do the structure in a disciplined fashion. So, bone dry, acidity medium plus, yes, and a bit surprising, but it, you know, it works alongside the tannin. Alcohol, medium plus plus. The bottle, which I have, you know, peeled and revealed, is saying 14.5, but it handles it. You can feel it in your chest, but it simply adds mouthfeel and weight. Tannin. It's medium plus, but please pay attention to the quality of the tannin. It is drying tannin. You know, you can have medium plus tannins that are, you know, gentle and friendly. This is verging into the slightly spiky, nippy tannins. Texture, gritty, astringent, but you know, that's just one element in this wine. There's also a weight to it that balances that out. Finish is long, I would say, actually with long promise as well. It's a young wine that's saying, and you think I'm long now, just hang out for the next couple, 3 years. Complexity, high, and more on the way. So I will tell you when you're playing, and we can go to the next panel with considering what this is. If you consider all elements aside, the way the wine looks and the way the wine feels, that'll start you on the trip to the right corner of France. The tells on this wine are pretty classic, meaning the wine is speaking to what it is through what? Through the fruit, through the mouthfeel, through the elements of inorganic and organic earth. And what options do we have? 2 Bordelais varieties, Cabernet Sauvignon / blend, Merlot / blend, and Syrah. Let's talk about Syrah first. You know, check the aromatics. Are you getting any fingerprints of Syrah that, for me, absolutely include dark fruit, but will, with very rare exception, have elements of white and black pepper. And whether you want to call it meat or smoke or smoked meat, one of my friends always calls it the Jimmy Dean smell. So you might want to check for that. Sometimes it's not apparent, but if it's a good example, especially of Northern Rhone, it'll be in there. And if you're flipping back and forth between Cabernet and Merlot, don't overthink it. Go to whether, you know, the black fruit or the red fruit is pulling the wine, and also to the mouthfeel. It also depends on a blend, just how much Cabernet Sauvignon is in it. There's a big difference between 60% and 75%, though it tends to be the little elephant in the room. And when you're considering regions, pretty straightforward. Loire is in there just to, you know, make our minds a little more tense, you know. I wouldn't worry about Loire much, because we've obviously worked Cabernet Franc, and we've talked about Pinot Noir and the Loire for red. So let's go ahead and
I'm going to share the results. So we have most people thinking that it's Cabernet, but the right call here, Madeline, of trying to help people think through Cabernet versus Merlot. And when we get a wine like this in our kits, I feel like this is a great way to teach yourself that difference when we find the
absolutely end. And you know, it's also a very good way, once we reveal it, regardless of what you deduced or didn't deduce or thought or got right or didn't get, don't doubt it. You know, when we tell you it's a good example of type, we wouldn't say this just to be sort of, you know, happily conversational and encouraging. When we say something's a good example of type, we really mean it. But I think it's neat that we've got the split between Cab Sauv, Merlot, right bank, left bank.
So what would you call these tannins? Akeem is asking, is it softer tannins equals Merlot in your book?
Generally slightly softer, yes. Less drying, less foursquare. You know, they're not Nebbiolo tannins, and we don't have Nebbiolo on here. Nebbiolo is that little perverse son of a gun that looks like Pinot Noir and then just, you know, rips your mouth out when it's young Barolo. But certainly really focus in behind the sweet fruit, behind the sweet oak. The tannins are drying to the point of not shutting the flavor of the wine down, but making you pay attention. Rub your tongue against the roof of your mouth And here's something, you have to be very honest with how you perceive tannin. If you have a high tannin tolerance, it's important to learn that and know that, because otherwise it might mess with your deductions a little bit.
Madeline, one more question, then we're going to reveal.
Sure.
Right versus left bank. This is a good time to talk about how to deduce between left versus right. What are you looking for?
And again, we're talking, when I say classic, I don't mean old fashioned. I mean, you know, what the great properties and producers on both banks are doing with some regularity. There's a reason why Cabernet is dominant on the left bank, because the soil is different. The grapes ripen differently. You know, we've got what, gravel on the left bank to oversimplify it, and, you know, clay and such on the right bank. It's cooler soils. So we've got more Merlot and Cab Franc on the right. Very little Cabernet Sauvignon, actually, but significant amounts of Merlot and Cab Franc on the left bank. But remember what I said about Cabernet Sauvignon? It's the elephant in the room. Even at 60% or such, it's gonna lead. You know, that black fruit will come through. Merlot, more red fruit. Cab Franc, different aromatics, but on the right bank, it's very rare that Cab Franc is the dominant variety in the blend. So tannin quality and, you know, a little heavier on the red fruit right bank.
Very helpful. Thank you. We're gonna go ahead and reveal. And so
we are leaving southern France. Woo,
leaving
where are we
southern France,
going? We are
and
going
we are
to the
definitely
west.
going to Bordeaux.
Yes, there's the river.
Did
And
you see the river? And then did you see where we ended up?
And this is on the left bank of the river. This is one of my favorite wine places on the planet. This is Pauillac, Pauillac. And I think Pauillac is Cabernet Sauvignon, you know, to me, and actually quintessential left bank and Omedoc. This is an estate that actually is in some pretty expensive real estate. It is, you know, located in the triangle of Chateau Latour, Pichon, Longueville, Baron, and Lynch-Bages in the southern end of Pauillac, which is what? Adjacent to Saint-Julien, as opposed to the northern end where Mouton and Lafite are located, you know, peeking into Saint-Estèphe. We're talking about, you know, some heavy classified growth land here. This is from a spectacular vintage. 2018, very young. And, you know, the tannins, the wines tend to be concentrated backward, good collector wine, but this wine is showing great aromatically. And something I want to speak to is that why is this not New World Cabernet Sauvignon? Can I just walk towards this, Limang? Because
Please.
we talk about, you know, varietal identification. We know we're in France. This is, you know, where's Chile in his hat? Right? I forgot to wear a beret today, but why is it not Napa Valley? You know, why is it not Western Australia? Why is it not Washington State? And again, to simplify but not dumb it down, remember the acidity level we talked about? This is a ripe vintage, 18. They're getting over 14% alcohol by volume, but that acidity, I would bet money, is not adjusted. You know, that inorganic earth, especially graphite, lead pencil. I just love that in Pauillac. It's really the thumbprint of the Omedoc, but specifically this commune. And the fact that it's not a mono-varietal. You know, it is tempered a bit by Merlot. They claim 62% Cabernet Sauvignon being planted, 31% Merlot, a skosh of Cab Franc. But remember, what's planted and what's harvested in a given year are not always the same thing. I would bet more money that there may be a little bit more Cab Sauv in this, because that's how it's coming across. They claim 40% new oak. They're obviously using small barrels, but you know, the oak, the wine can handle the oak. It absolutely digests it. It's not sitting on the wine, even in its youth. What else to tell you about it? This is privately owned by a family that are descendants of an acclaimed nursery man, the Meffra family, that bought this estate. Oh, wow, is this gorgeous or what? In the 1950s, and his grandsons are running it. It's called Belgrave, which also its name historically speaks to the grave, the gravel. in this area. This is not further inland in Pauillac. This is prime real estate, you know. So I don't know what the retail is on this, but I would assume
50.
it's not. What is it?
50.
50. You know, that's actually a great buy for a 2018
Oh, yeah.
Pauillac of this quality. Bravo to the Meffres. And
I would just add, Madeline, I wrote down a words. I was just going through it when you were speaking about the acid and the alcohol and the tannin. This wine has such tension in it in a good way. You know, it's got that wonderful writing of all of those characters without any one of them overwhelming the other and in place and in check. But it has, you know, it is so hard to juxtapose tannin, alcohol, and acid together at extreme at levels like that when your alcohols are higher and get that balance right. And this wine, I think, rides that tightrope so well. And
it's a really beautiful Bordeaux. You know, here's to the
and it's
team.
classically Pauillac. It is
No, it's
classically
classically Pauillac. And here's some beautiful old vines that are not, you know, head trained and left alone to do their thing, right? Because the real estate's too expensive. But I will tell you too, in terms of memorizing aromatics and getting a visceral call, this wine has absolutely the handprint of tobacco, cedar, cigar box, forest floor, black fruit, integrated oak. You know, we talk about it, but there it is. And you don't have to spend Lafitte money to get it. That's what's really cool about this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the last thing I would add about this wine is that unlike a couple of others, I'm thinking wines 1 through 3, maybe even actually of all 5, this is the one that really needs food. I mean, you can't sit around and sip, and I mean, some of us could, but this wine would be so enhanced by being at table with either a piece of steak or some eggplant or for vegetarian, you know, just something that's got some texture and some weight, something to counterbalance that high acid tannin thing. And I think other nuances of the wine would pop out that way. Right now, it is so, codified in by all of its core structural elements that needs to sort of either sit in your glass for a while, and the more the wine is sat in my glass, even just the little remnants that are left right now. By the way, a great trick for everybody. Sometimes you want to get the best sense of what a wine is like. Wait till your glass is empty. There's nothing left in it except for what's clinging to the sides of the glass. Then go smell the wine. That'll give you the truest sense of what the wine's aromatics are all about. But this wine, I think, hurts in the sense that having it with a meal would bring it out even more.
But you know, you bring up
you.
something that's really brilliant, Evan. You know, it isn't so much in the case of this wine, I would just want a little bit of protein, salt, and fat in some gentle, low-key form to erase some of the tannin and acid, just neutralize it a little, because you know what will happen? The flavors will surge.
Exactly.
So the nose is showier than the finish because it needs a little help.
I love the Korean barbecue idea.
Ooh.
That sounds fantastic right about now. Thank you guys so much. We're a little bit over time, so I want to get to the last slide here, and then I want to remind those of you who haven't been with us in our happy half hour, Evan, Tim, and Madeline will be available for about half an hour or 23 minutes left until 3 o'clock Pacific. We're going to stay on for those of you who want to show yourselves or just listen in. And we will certainly be here to answer more questions. We did skip some questions because we were just pressed for time. But again, happy Bastille Day, everyone. So excited that we're all here together on Bastille Day. And if you have summer plans and still joining us, thank you for that, because we're deep in July, and the fact that we're here and you're joining us is amazing. So if you stay on, you will have the choice to be a panelist like us so that we can see you and we can have a chat. And I hope you enjoy this. And if you like this tasting, we're going to be putting this particular kit. We're going to actually hold it in our stock as a standard French kit to sell, because I think a lot of people would benefit. Definitely send your friends, maybe host your own tasting and be the expert. Now, last but not least, we have the August 11th tasting coming up. It is not a single region. We're back to all around the world. So we hope you can join us for August 11th. I love that, Debbie, you ditched your responsibilities. Thank you for being irresponsible this afternoon. We thank you for that out there in Michigan. And last but not least, Pinot Noir kits. We have those. If it's your first time joining us and you haven't heard about these, go get them. So without further ado, I want to thank everyone for being here. And then I'm going to stay on along with our three panelists. Guys, if you want to say goodbye to those who are leaving, and then I'm going to let everybody else back in.
Au revoir.
Au revoir. Thank you for your
Adios.
company and your attention.
All right. So, guys, favorites today. This is a tough one to pick. Evan, great job on your final selection there.
Oh, I don't know. I think the wines were selected with the idea of being, solid representations of what they were, and I thought they all showed well. I think the only wine to me that showed us a little bit of an anachronism was wine 2, simply because of the ripeness of it. But particularly for people who have more New World palates, it probably made them happier than a traditional Puy Puissé would. But I thought all the wines showed delightfully well today. I went back to the wine 1, that Alsace Riesling, and it's opening up nicely too. But all of the wines showed well. A tip of the hat to wine 3. How often is it that you have rosé wines of character and personality? If I were to make a call, I said that might be the only rosé from Provence I'll drink for a while. But I loved all the wines, and more importantly, I loved what everybody, my colleagues, brought to them in terms of narratives and rationales.
Evan, you bring up a great point. I'm going back to the whites because I'm actually selfish. I want to see them pop. And quite often when you go back to the whites after having red wine on your palate, it's like an aha moment. A, it's warmed up. B, your palate's really tempered from tannin from the reds, and the whites will be highlighted. It's kind of a neat trick that will often clarify what the hell we're talking about.
And also, and I don't know for you guys, and certainly for all of you out there in Zoom land, these wines are, it's that old adage of they're pushed in these little 187 milliliter bottles. I find that most of the wines, it would be tough to tell people to do this, but the wines hit stride at about 45 minutes to an hour of air. And so it doesn't surprise me when you come back to the whites or go back to that Chinon now, or even go back to that little rosé, which you wouldn't expect would quote unquote open up. All of them are more accessible now than they were right out of the bottle. And even after the 15 minutes of instruction that we generally recommend.
Maybe I have a cheap palate, but I love that rosé. It's great value for how much pleasure I get out of that wine.
What's the price on that, Li Meng?
$18.
Oh my God. I work for a retailer. We have a lot more expensive rosés than that. They're not going to be better than this.
And I love how Ronica's just said that the rosé is gone. I love how you finished that one. That's a good telltale sign on what your favorite is. Which glass is lower?